December 13th, 1943. The skies over Assam, India, are perfectly clear. Just the kind of day where a pilot should have an easy patrol. Routine, safe, uneventful. But on this morning, Second Lieutenant Philip R. Adair was about to become one of the most outnumbered pilots in World War II. What started as a routine scramble would turn into a fight that defied every rule of aerial combat. One man, one fighter plane, against a coordinated force of over 60 Japanese aircraft. And his solution? It was so unconventional, so desperate, that it wouldn't have surprised anyone if it had failed. But it didn't. This is the story of how one pilot decided that the only way to beat impossible odds was to do something nobody expected. In late 1943, the war in the Far East was brutal and relentless. The Japanese had conquered vast swaths of Asia. The Allies were fighting hard to push them back, but every mile of territory came at tremendous cost in blood and machines. Assam, in northeastern India, held one of the critical forward air bases for the Allies. From here, American fighters could patrol, intercept Japanese bombers, and defend against raids that threatened supply lines and troop concentrations. The 80th Fighter Group was stationed there. It was a rotation of pilots, mechanics, and support personnel, the skeleton crew that kept American air defense alive in this remote theater of war. The fighters they flew were Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, not the fastest fighters in the sky, not the most maneuverable, but tough, reliable. Equipped with powerful machine guns and the ability to take punishment and keep flying, by 1943, the P-40 was getting old. Newer fighters like the P-51 Mustang were arriving in theater, faster and more capable. But the P-40 had a reputation. It was honest. What you saw was what you got. Philip R. Adair flew one of these P-40s. He had named it Lulu Bell, a name that suggested he had some affection for his plane. And he did. Adair was a second lieutenant. In the hierarchy of air combat, that made him junior. Fresh. Less experienced than many of the older pilots. But he was there because he was good at what he did flying fighters. On the morning of December 13th, Adair had flown 43 combat missions. 43 times, he had strapped into Lulu Bell, taken off from this airfield, and faced enemy aircraft across some of the most hostile skies in Asia. Every mission was a calculated risk. Fly out, patrol the designated area, intercept enemy aircraft if you find them, come back, repeat. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. But it was the work that kept the war going. Adair had no idea that his 44th mission was going to be something entirely different. Alerts came fast at Assam. When Japanese aircraft were spotted approaching the base, sirens would sound. Ground crews would scatter. Pilots would run to their planes. On the morning of December 13th, the alert came in. Enemy aircraft detected. Inbound. Distance unknown, but getting closer. Adair was scrambled. He sprinted from the ready room to the flight line, where Lulu Bell was already being prepared by ground crews. He climbed into the cockpit. Harness, checks, radio call. Everything done exactly as trained, done 1,000 times before, done without thinking. Lulu Bell's engine roared to life. The propeller spun. The plane vibrated. He released the brakes and taxied onto the runway. As Adair climbed away from the base, other P-40s were still taking off behind him. The 80th Fighter Group was getting birds in the air as fast as they could. But Adair had a head start. As he climbed higher, gaining altitude, Adair looked ahead. He was searching for the enemy. The morning light was good. Visibility was excellent. He should be able to spot them. In the distance, he saw movement. Aircraft. Multiple aircraft. At first, Adair thought it was just a flight. 4 or 5 enemy planes. Standard fighter sweep. He'd engage them, maybe splash 1 or 2, and come back to base. He took a closer look, and what he saw made him understand that his life was about to change. It wasn't a flight. It wasn't even a squadron. It was a massive, coordinated strike package, 4 separate groups of bombers, each with 6 heavy bombers, escorted by layers of fighters above and below the formation. 60, maybe more. It was hard to count in the sky. But Adair's brain processed the numbers quickly. 60 enemy aircraft versus 1 pilot, 1 fighter plane. He made a radio call. "Base, this is Adair. I have visual contact on a large enemy formation. 60+ bandits inbound to base. I'm engaging." The people on the ground heard this message. They understood what he was saying. 1 pilot against 60 Japanese aircraft. They knew the odds. Every person at that base knew what those odds meant. But Adair wasn't asking permission. He was reporting what he was about to do. The other P-40s were still climbing, still trying to reach altitude. They wouldn't be in position for several minutes. By then, the Japanese bombers might already be dropping their payload. Assam held more than just aircraft. There was a hospital here, supply stores, ammunition dumps, fuel depots. The Japanese bombers would try to destroy all of it. If they succeeded, they would cripple American operations in this sector. Adair made his decision. He would go in alone. He would attack the formation before the other fighters could reach altitude, and he would start with the bombers. Japanese bomber formations had a specific structure. The bombers would fly in a tight cluster in the middle. Fighters flew above, below, and to the sides to protect them. If a fighter attacked a Japanese escort fighter, the whole formation would know about it. The other fighters would converge. The bombers would turn or take evasive action. The attack would become predictable. But if a fighter went straight for the bombers, attacking from the edge, with surprise on its side, there was a chance. Just a chance. Adair climbed higher, positioning himself above and to the left of the formation. The sun was behind him. Classic fighter pilot positioning. The Japanese pilots below might not see him coming. As Lulu Bell climbed through 25,000 feet, Adair's oxygen system was working hard. The cockpit was getting cold. His breath fogged the canopy. But he kept climbing. He had to gain enough altitude for a dive attack. He had to come in fast, fast enough that the enemy couldn't track him, couldn't get guns on him before he was gone. At 28,000 feet, he had what he needed. He was higher than the formation. He was in position. He was alone. Adair pushed the stick forward. Lulu Bell's nose pointed down. The speed increased. 70 miles per hour. 80, 90, 100+ miles per hour in a screaming dive. The horizon growing larger. The Japanese formation growing larger. As he reached the bombers, Adair squeezed the trigger. 6.5 caliber machine guns opened up, thousands of rounds per second tearing through the air. The tracer rounds. Every 5th bullet, painted bright so the pilot could see where his fire was going, streamed out ahead of his plane. The stream raked across the lead bombers. He could see the hits, the wings lighting up with impacts. The Japanese pilots saw him now. They broke formation. The bombers began taking evasive action, pulling up, turning, but Adair was already too fast, moving too quickly through their formation. Before they could bring guns to bear, he was past them. A Zero fighter intercepted him. The Japanese pilot had been waiting for something like this lone American fighter diving through the formation. The Zero was more maneuverable than the P-40. In a turning fight, the Zero would win, but Adair wasn't interested in a turning fight. He pushed the stick full forward into the left corner. The negative G maneuver threw him upside down, the engine gasping for a moment, the plane shuddering. The Zero tried to follow, but it couldn't match the move. Adair was gone. Another dive, another escape, and he was climbing back up for another pass. From the B-17 and B-29 formations. Above WWII, there were Allied bombers flying above this Japanese strike package, trying to reach targets behind Japanese lines. American gunners watched this one P-40 weaving through 60 Japanese aircraft. One of them later described it as like watching one man play tag with the whole Japanese Air Force. And that's what Adair was doing. Over and over. Attack. Dive. Escape. A climb. Reload. Attack again. But then, something went wrong. On one of his runs, a Zero got a good burst off at him. The bullets found their mark. Fire erupted from Lulu Bell's engine. Adair felt the heat. Flames rolled around both sides of the engine cowling, racing past the armored plate that protected the pilot. His controls were getting sluggish. The plane was on fire. The engine was dying. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like this one-man stand was ending in the worst possible way. But Adair yanked back on the throttle with both hands on the stick. He had to stay in control, had to keep flying. Miraculously, as the fuel flow decreased, the fire diminished. Not out, but manageable. Adair nursed Lulu Bell higher, climbing away from the formation even as the engine coughed and sputtered. The Japanese formation was still coming, but it was disorganized now. The tight bombing formation had broken apart. Bombers were scattered. Fighters were confused about where the American was coming from. And in that chaos, something important was happening. The other P-40s from Adair's squadron were reaching altitude. The first ones were arriving now, summoned by the radio calls, climbing as fast as they could to reach the fight. But Adair wasn't giving up. Not yet. The problem Adair faced now was simple but devastating. His ammunition was running low. Machine gun ammunition was measured in seconds. 6x5 caliber guns firing thousands of rounds per minute. A 45-second burst would empty 1,000 rounds. Another burst, and you're down to 30 seconds. Then 15. Then nothing. Adair was down to his last few seconds of ammunition. But the Japanese formation was still coming. The bombers were still heading for Assam base, and the fighters he'd been dueling with were still there, still trying to pin him down, still looking for that moment when he'd be vulnerable. So Adair did something that should not have worked. He kept attacking anyway. Without bullets, Adair dove at the fighters, not to shoot, but to scare them, to force them to break away, to disrupt their ability to protect the bombers. The Japanese pilots didn't know he was out of ammunition. All they knew was that an American P-40 was diving at them, coming fast, committed to collision if it meant stopping them from their objective. And they broke. They scattered. They avoided him. It's a bluff. An audacious bluff. The kind of thing that works once, maybe twice, but not repeatedly. But Adair kept doing it anyway. Dive at the fighters. They break away. Climb back up. Dive again. Repeat. Meanwhile, the P-40s from his squadron were fighting now. They'd reached altitude and were engaging the Japanese formation. The fight had become a confused melee, multiple aircraft in a small piece of sky, tracer rounds crossing, planes banking hard. The sound of engine roars and gunfire echoing through the morning air. The bombers dropped their payload, but when they did, something strange happened. The bombs were falling, yes, but they weren't hitting their targets. They were missing, scattering across the jungle around the base. Some historians believe that Adair's first attack, when he came screaming through the formation with his machine guns blazing, threw off the bombing run. Maybe a bomber was damaged. Maybe the navigator was rattled. Maybe the timing was just off. But the truth was, Adair had disrupted the entire bombing pattern by doing the one thing nobody expected. He attacked like he had unlimited ammunition, like he had a whole squadron backing him up, like a single P-40 could somehow hold up a 60-plane Japanese strike force, and he almost pulled it off. But now his plane was badly damaged. The engine was still running but slowly dying. Fuel was running low. The controls were sluggish. Lulu Bell was holding together, but just barely. Adair made the decision. He had to get back to Assam. He had to land. If he didn't make it back, all of this was for nothing. The problem was that the airfield was not in the direction he was flying. and his fuel was so low that he couldn't afford to waste any extra flying time. So Adair tried something that no pilot should ever try. He flipped Lulu Bell upside down. The reason pilots flip their planes upside down when they have to is that the fuel in the tank feeds through gravity. When you're right side up, fuel flows normally. When you're upside down, fuel stops flowing, which means the engine stops running. But Adair's engine was running rough anyway, struggling, coughing. By going upside down, he changed the fuel flow in a way that made the engine run smoother, cleaner, more efficiently. Flying upside down, Adair could get better fuel consumption. He could stretch his remaining fuel. He could make it back, so he flew like that, upside down. Bleeding altitude. The jungle below him, or above him, from his perspective getting closer, the airfield was getting close. Adair could see it now, through the damaged canopy, through the smoke still coming from his engine. He needed to flip right side up for landing. He needed to lower the landing gear. He needed to slow the plane down enough to land without tearing off the wings, all while flying on fumes. With the ground coming up fast, Adair flipped the plane right side up. His landing gear came down still inverted, in that impossibly difficult transition. Then he straightened out. The wheels touched the runway. Lulu Bell screamed to a stop, smoking and damaged but intact. Adair taxied to the revetment where ground crews were waiting, eyes wide, not quite believing that the P-40 was coming back. He shut down the engine. The propeller slowed. The smoke continued to rise from the cowling. Adair unbuckled his harness and climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His oxygen mask had left marks on his face. A ground crew chief was the first to reach him. "Lieutenant, your plane. How did you?" Adair just shook his head. He didn't have words yet. Back at base operations, Adair gave his report. The intelligence officers took notes, asked questions, tried to piece together what had happened in the sky. 60 Japanese aircraft, 1 American pilot, 1 heavily damaged American fighter. The math didn't add up to what everyone knew had happened. But the evidence was clear. The Japanese bombers had missed their target. The bombing pattern was scattered and ineffective, and 1 P-40 pilot had somehow disrupted the entire operation. The Japanese formation had suffered losses. Fighters had been shot down not just by Adair, but by the entire squadron once they reached altitude. Bombers had been damaged. But the most important thing wasn't the tally of enemy aircraft destroyed. It was the impact on the mission. The Japanese had come to destroy Assam base. They had failed, not because the defenses were strong, they weren't, but because one pilot had decided to do something that defied military logic. He had attacked a force 60 times larger than his own. He had done it alone. He had disrupted a coordinated, professional enemy operation through sheer audacity and determination. Later, Adair would be asked about it. "How did you think? What were you thinking when you went in alone?" He said something simple. "I knew that if I waited for help, they would attack. I knew that if the bombers got through, the base would suffer terrible losses. There was a hospital here, supply stores we needed. I couldn't let them destroy all that." He wasn't thinking about heroics. He wasn't thinking about how many enemy planes there were. He was thinking about the people on the ground. The soldiers, the nurses, the mechanics. The cooks and drivers and medics who would die if those bombers got through. So he did what he could do. With 1 P-40 and more guts than sense, he did what was necessary. Philip R. Adair was awarded the Silver Star for his bravery that day. The third highest medal for bravery in the United States military, but the most important recognition came from the people on the ground, the ones he saved. They didn't need a medal to know what Adair had done for them. They could see it, they could feel it. One man, flying an old fighter plane, had stood between them and annihilation. After December 13, 1943, Philip R. Adair continued flying missions. Lulu Bell was repaired. More patrols followed, more combats, more flights into danger. But that one mission, the 44th of his tour, was the one that mattered. It was the one people talked about, the one that defined him as a pilot. The story of one P-40 against 60 Japanese aircraft spread through the Air Force. Pilots heard about it. Soldiers heard about it. By the time the war was over, it had become legend. Adair survived the war. He completed his tour in Assam and rotated home. He lived the rest of his life with the knowledge that on one December morning in 1943, he had done something extraordinary. But what made Adair's story different from other incredible feats in World War II was the purity of it. There was no lucky moment, no split-second opportunity. He didn't stumble into this fight. He chose it. He saw 60 enemy aircraft coming for his base, and he decided that the only way to stop them was to do something so audacious, so bold, that it couldn't be ignored. And it worked. Lulu Bell was grounded after that mission. She'd taken too much damage. The P-40 had done her job. She had carried her pilot through the impossible and brought him home. The Second World War produced thousands of incredible stories. Heroic pilots, brave soldiers, impossible odds overcome. But the story of Second Lieutenant Philip R. Adair stands apart because it wasn't about being the best, the strongest, or the most skilled. It was about refusing to accept impossible odds. When Adair saw 60 Japanese aircraft headed for his base, he could have turned away. He could have waited for the other fighters. He could have accepted that the odds were too great, that one man couldn't make a difference. Instead, he attacked, not with superior numbers or superior equipment, but with determination, with audacity, with the absolute conviction that even a single fighter plane, piloted by a man who refused to give up, could matter. And in doing so, Philip R. Jesht, Adair proved something that many had suspected but few had demonstrated. Courage isn't measured by the odds. It's measured by the choice you make when the odds are against you. He flew alone into the impossible, and he changed everything.